The Happy Warrior Podcast, conservative commentary on the news of the day from a more positive perspective.
Hello everyone, this is the Happy Warrior Podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Happy Warrior Pete. I'm grateful to be here with all of you again today. I have a special treat for you. I am interviewing writer, author, journalist Kay Hymowitz. She wrote this book, Manning Up. It's from 2011, but it still holds up pretty well. It's a great book. She likes to write frequently about the state of the American and Western family, child and adult development. She talks about the state of the single motherhood problem in the United States, the role of men, the role of women. She's all this kind of stuff. Right now, my thinking and my reading is all kind of focused in this area about how Western societies develop, and the family is the core, it's the building blocks of society. It really is. So I am so excited to have her talk with us. She's from the Manhatten Institute. The Manhatten Institute is a conservative-ish think tank. They are very good. I'm grateful to have this opportunity. She is awesome. The interview had a heck of a lot of technical glitches. The gremlins were at play. So I'm going to clean it up as best I can, cut away the in-between stuff, and get it as close as I can. Was it a perfect interview? No, but it's a growing learning experience. I hope you get a lot out of this as much as I did. And again, if Kay is watching this, thank you so much for your time and taking the energy and time and patience to do this with me. I really appreciate it. This is really kind of you. Thank you. And that is all. All right, so let's get this puppy started. And thank you for watching the Happy Warrior Podcast. All right. Well, it is so good to be here with all of you today. I have an intellectual treat to share with all of you. I have with me today the wonderful Kay Hymowitz. She is among other things, she is a writer for City Journal. She's a book author. I just read one of her books right here, Manning Up. She has several other books. Besides that, she attended Brandeis. I think that's how you pronounce it. Brandeis?
It's Brandeis.
Brandeis, yeah. Okay. That's Brandeis University and Columbia. And where else have you've written a bunch of places. Anyhow, it is good to be here with you. Would it be fair to say that among the subjects you write often is children, parenthood, male and female development, that kind of thing?
Yes, although I also, fairly early on in scholarly career, began to see that there was a connection between what I was seeing in the family and child rearing. There was a connection between those things and inequality and poverty. So I've also looked into those areas and tried to show what the connection is.
Excellent. Yeah, no, this is a subject that, your book, I read not too long ago, Ben Sass's book, Them, and there's a couple books, around that about the loss of society community. Another one I read was Suicide of the West, Jonah Goldberg. And your book, you just kind of fit in, because all those talk about what is happening to U.S. and Western society. And the big problem, as I was just reading this last night, where Jonah Goldberg basically says, if I can quote him, he says, "Every generation, humans start from scratch. As Hannah Arendt said, every generation Western civilization is evaded by barbarians. We call them children. As babies come into the world with the same programming, just like the Viking, the Hun, or the caveman babies. These barbarians need to be civilized. That's a job primarily done by families, which is why the days are long and the years are short. We teach barbarians how to be citizens in the broad sense of the word through formal education, religious teaching, social norms, and the modeling of proper behavior." And his point is that families and societies mold people out of that natural man kind of clay. And your book, Manning Up, and then you write about it, is so fascinating. I really think it delves really deep into the fundamental levels why there's so much strife and craziness now with the family and with both men and women, millennials. I think it all ties into that. So it's fabulous to be able to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
All right, well, let's get started here. So, what would be a good place to start? Sorry, I lost my sheet.
Well, I think we wanted to start by talking about what has happened to the family. Why have families been falling apart?
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I lost my
That's
tab.
okay.
So,
yeah.
So, okay, in a nutshell, what do you think is happening to families today? What is going on with them?
Well, the first thing I'd like to clarify is that actually what's happening to families started about 40 plus years ago, maybe even 50 years ago. And if I had to just put it very simply, I would say that there was a changing economy and changing values and attitudes. Changing values and attitudes frequently follow changes in the economy. So the changes in the economy that we began to see in the 60s, but speeded up quite a bit since then, was a shift from the industrial manufacturing economy to what economists like to call a knowledge economy. Knowledge work tends to require more education and less brawn. Industrial work was kind of dirty and took some strength. And knowledge economy, on the other hand, was things like jobs in law, medicine, academia, and media. And those jobs tended to be very female-friendly. Women were good at them, and many men were as well, but some men not as much. And also those jobs tended to be more enjoyable and stimulating than the repetitive work and the dirty jobs in the factory floor. And they're higher paid as well. But so women started to achieve very highly in education. They are now, and by 1980 actually, there were as many women graduating, as high a percentage of women graduating college as men, and since then it's about 57% women to men. Women are doing quite well in education. They are doing fairly well in the workforce, despite what we hear a lot about the gender gap, and we can talk about that if that interests you. They're doing quite well. Men, on the other hand, have seen a stagnation in their median wages. This is with the decline of the manufacturing sector. And they also are not necessarily finding the kind of work that their fathers and grandfathers could. So we now have a large number of young prime age men not in the workforce. And although women are still more likely to not be in the workforce, it's nowhere near the same gap that it used to be. And the point is, we have fewer men who are capable of being husbands and fathers in any financial sense. So that was the economic side of what happened. But as I said, there was also a change in attitudes and values. The social changes that are usually associated with the 1960s. We had feminism, or a second wave of feminism, which emphasized women's independence and self-fulfillment through work and careers. And it went further than that, really. Women were not only not to be dependent on men, shouldn't be dependent on men, but I've always argued the problem with feminism was not that it liberated women to be in the workforce or in other ways, but that it denied that the sexes are interdependent, which as you'll see during our conversations right now, they are. At any rate, single motherhood began to increase. And in the 60s, it wasn't just feminism. Overall, there was an increasing emphasis on self-expression, individuality, feelings of mistrust of authority, and of institutions like marriage. So we began to see in the 60s, in the 60s and especially in the 70s, a rise in the divorce rate that was consistent with this change of values. It used to be that people stayed around in unhappy marriages, maybe too much, but after the 60s, that seemed to make no sense at all, especially because women could support themselves. So you can see there was an interplay between these two trends, between the economy and the social attitudes.
No, it is very interesting. Your book, it was written in 2011, but it seems like most of the stats and the data that you share, that those trends have held still, or they continue to rise. I was just thinking about like so much of what's going on today with the millennial generation, which I'm a part of. I think a lot of those problems, and we don't like to think about it because it's tough, but a lot of those problems are consequences of the change of attitudes in male and female development, the change of attitudes of sex norms, the change of attitudes of what men and women should strive to be or do. Your book talks. It's interesting because my grandfather, even my father, to some extent, what they do was you was expected that when you became of age, you were to start looking for a woman that would be to be your wife. You'd want a career, but you have that career for the purpose of being a father and a husband. Mm-hmm. And that your book brings up a good point. That's no law for many men. That's just no longer true.
Right. So as work became more of a form of self-expression with this rise of the knowledge economy, more interesting jobs that required a little more engagement, and also the people began to think more in terms of, I need to follow my passion, right? I need to find the job that's going to really fulfill me, make me a fuller person, and that I'll find so much passion in. I think that women really were able to soar off that idea. Now, by the way, I should mention that I think that they overdid it. Many people, my own daughters included, are finding that the workplace, they want to be working, but they find out that it's more complicated than passionate. All right. So I think that's right. I think for many men who, particularly men who are not academically inclined, there just isn't as much out there for them. And because they are no longer absolutely essential to family life, at least that's what the culture is telling them, I think they lose a sense of obligation, of duty, of motivation. Because after all, why? Why go to a workplace you don't enjoy? Because the women can take care of themselves, and they are taking care of themselves. So I think there's a way in which we've told men, you're kind of extraneous or irrelevant to family life, or certainly not, I should say, and certainly not essential. Now, Yep. It is true, and I assume some of your listeners will object, well, I don't feel that way, and I think many, many people do not feel that way. But because so many women are having to raise children by themselves, and so often divorce or a single mother, a non-marital birth leads to custody of the mother, I think that the message is over and over again, you don't matter. Now, in addition, I should mention that seeing this a little less right now, but for a decade or more, men were treated as kind of silly buffoons in TV ads, on TV shows, Homer Simpson types, Mm-hmm. It wasn't like Marge, who was much more sensible, and Lisa, goodness, who was such an academic star. But I think that also added to their sense of irrelevance. It was something in the culture that was saying, your stuff is not that important,
Yeah, I mean, there was an undertone of the Me Too movement, which seems to be either eating itself or fizzling out. The undertone about the men, they're just too much hassle. We don't really need them. It's very interesting. I'm not. And I should point out this podcast. I'm not about the men's rights movement. I'm not saying. I'm just saying that. Males and females both have an important role in society. They both have an important role in families, and they both are individuals. I just think we need to learn to appreciate both. One of the problems, I live in South Dakota, and one of the problems we have is because the way our family court system is set up by law is that the vast majority of kids end up where it's one parent holds it, and it's usually the mother. I have a friend that this is one of his big issues he likes to work on, and it is very interesting. He tells me that he feels sometimes like the dads don't really matter if they're around or not. Now we know by statistics that generally speaking, having both parents in the home that improves their mental health, improves their success. It makes things easier. It's part of the famous. What do they call it? The success equation that conservatives like to write about.
Success sequence, yes.
The success sequence. Thank you. Yeah. It's interesting. So what do you think are going to be the consequences of? I'm looking at some of the stats in preparation for this interview. So like 77% of black births are to single moms. I think we're at.
It's about 72%.
Yeah,
still very, very high.
Very high. Yeah, and it's like 40% of children, this is from 2017, are born out of wedlock. I mean, what is going to be the consequences of this high rate of either single parenthood or just not a stable family group?
So a couple things to say about this. One, and this is an issue I've written about a great deal, is that where the inequality that many people are so concerned about in the country is being written into the next generation. By the way, the families are structured. Now, let me explain. When I said that there is a much higher rate of divorce than there was in the early 1960s, you mentioned the non-marital birth rates. Those things tend to be these days, largely common in less skilled, lower educated households. It so happens that the traditional family, except for including a working mother, is still very alive and well in the homes of the highly educated. By highly, I mean the college educated. Divorce rates have gone down for that group since 1980. Continue to go down. Their non-marital birth rate is below 10%. This is the complete opposite of what's happening for less skilled men and women. And the results are that you have children who are benefiting the children who are of highly educated people who are benefiting not just from the fact that their parents are educated, but also that they are stably married. The child will not have to adjust to different stepfathers, step-siblings, or what have you, which is what frequently happens when there's a marital breakdown, but also that they will grow up knowing their father well, being very connected to the father. And in addition, they have money, okay, because the higher education. Yeah, that helps a lot. So less educated people, not only do they have less money and less of a safety net in their families and communities, but they also are not providing their kids with the kind of stability that is really essential for kids to move out of the lower percentiles. That's another thing. We now know that if you grow up it's not just that you're more prone to poverty if you grow up in a single-parent home. You are also less likely to move ahead. So whereas something like 50% of children who are born to poor single mothers will stay poor, that number is closer to 14% for children, poor children born to married parents. So that's quite a difference. So that's why I say what I think we're looking at is a strengthening of our inequality rather than providing more opportunity to move up, less opportunity. And I think it creates a real, what I called in one of my books, a caste society. That is, where there's a lower caste, and an upper class. And they're increasingly divided, not just by education, but also by the way they're raising their children, and not just by income, but also by the way the time they're spending with their kids and the things they're doing with them.
No, I completely agree. I kind of have the observation in my local church. I'm a member of Church Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and so we are very we're like the Catholic Church. We're very family oriented, but you can definitely see that there's this line about, it just seems like there aren't a lot of people who belong to single parent households that are doing well financially. I don't want to call them rich, but upper middle class and above, and they almost all of them to the T. I think there's only one person that I know of in this group that had a divorce. Whereas when you look at the other side, the lower middle class and lower class, which I come from, I have a single mother. You do see it. It's much more common, and the social attitudes about what seems acceptable, what's okay, what's normal, it seems completely different. That does annoy me to some extent, because I think in our culture, especially in the media, with my background in journalism, it seems like the people that are our thought leaders, the people who are writing, are living this more classic 50s Leave It to Beaver style stable marriage and family unit. But what they broadcast, it seems very often, is the virtues of the single mother. I don't think they're intentionally being hypocritical, but it does annoy me quite a bit.
Right. Yeah. Well, you are so right.
Now, okay, so I have a couple more things I think on this about. So, did you think that there's any connection between, for example, the Pew Research study came out this year, and it said that there are fewer people going to church in the United States and more people are identifying as nuns, so much so that nuns are now competing for the top religious affiliation in the United States. Do you think there's any connection between that and the family destabilizing, or is that just the same trend we're seeing in places like Japan, which I don't know if they have a high divorce rate, but they have a very low marriage rate, and they're pretty high in unaffiliated.
Yeah. So there's a connection, but it's not clear what the connection is. So if you look at people who are actively engaged in their religious organization, church or synagogue or mosque, who go to services regularly, they are less likely to divorce and less likely to have a non-marital birth. That is true, although some people who say they are religious and believers don't fit into that category. In other words, they're not that observant. They just say they're religious believers. That in and of itself does not look like a protective factor. But I should also add that there are countries where families are a little more than ours that are quite secular. I'm thinking particularly of the Scandinavian countries. They have a significant higher number of percentage of kids who are growing parents than we do in the United States. So I don't, if religiosity is a protective factor for the family, it's not in every country, and it's not foolproof.
Okay, that is interesting. One of the cool things I liked about your book, and you pointed this out, was in the U.S. we like to say that a lot of the reasons that the changes in standard of living and the job opportunities for women, in the U.S. and Western world, we like to say it was feminism. But you point out that there are lots of countries that never had an official feminist movement that changed and are having this similar situation to what we're facing now.
Yeah, one of my arguments in that book and in general is that you needed the economic shift to rise of second wave feminism. And there was a reason that feminism began with educated women because they were bored at home. That's the whole story of Betty Friedan. They wanted something better to do with their time, and they had the education to do it. So that is a background factor, which I think is really not emphasized enough.
All right. Well, let's talk about millennials. So I want to ask a few questions about millennials specifically, and maybe if any of this ties into the addiction crisis. The stuff with the opioids is a hot topic in the news these days, understandably so. So, right. Okay, so what is going on? Now, millennials, unfortunately, seem to have they seem to be a group that seems to have a lot of anxiety. Lots of people have talked about in the millennial group that there are higher rates of suicide, in particular young women, that's just tragic. That is really terrible. And perhaps this is just a technology thing, but like many of the millennials I know, particularly the ones younger than me, so like my younger siblings, are scared to death to make a phone call. I don't know if it has anything to do with anything, but the idea somehow of calling someone, it just frightens them, the poor things. Texting and emails apparently are fine, but
you mean they're just not used to having to talk to people?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Well, I do think that things are tough for your generation. For people of my generation, there were just we came of age in a growing economy in the 1960s, and even though things got a little tough in the 70s, we hadn't gone through this major shift that I think exists now, and things are very, very competitive for young people in a way that was not true in my day. Where they have to get the best education and the highest credential they can in order to compete with other people who are clawing for the best jobs. And by the way, this is one of the reasons that we're seeing some decline in heartland cities because the best jobs tend to be on the coast. Maybe Chicago, though not gathered they've lost population too. Places like Houston are doing fairly well, Dallas. But the point is that the kids find themselves kind of struggling to make their resume and to deal with a very fast-changing economy, and one that threatens to become harder to negotiate with the advent of artificial intelligence. We don't even know what that means for this generation. And not to mention, they also have a lot of student debt. So they need to get an education to maintain a middle-class life, but they also don't have the money the parents might not have enough money to pay for college, which has just become exorbitant. So they take on debt. And that's debt. That would cause a lot of anxiety, and they graduate with a lot if they graduate. And it's not time to start a family at that point, or even to be able to buy or to marry and buy a home. So that is delaying the onset of adulthood for them.
Yeah, which is it is. They do seem to be at a higher. I don't try because it's pretty easy to rag on millennials, but I do understand a lot of the reasons for their stress. I mean, social media probably plays some role in that. It seems to affect, in particular, teenage girls more. But I don't know. That's one theory that I've heard about the reason for their higher rates of suicide. It is stressful. I think people forget.
By the way, let me clarify one point. Men are much more likely to commit suicide than women. I think what there's been is a large increase in younger, even teen girls, suicide. So that's what.
Yep. Oh, I think your phone is cutting out.
Oh, am I better now?
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. You're right. That's. I sometimes forget that because it's increased rates, but the men still are much more likely to do it. Yeah. I lost my train of thought. So what can we do? What do you think we can do to convince people to return to older, at least more, the success equation, like you mentioned earlier before? How can we convince, in particular, millennials, but in general, all Americans, that this is the way to go? How can we turn this ship around?
Right. So that's the key question, and one that I've been studying these issues for a couple decades now, and I still haven't come up with a good answer. We've tried some programs for increasing what the government agencies call healthy relationships. I don't think it's had much success. Nobody really has that much to say about alternative ideas. Now, I've always maintained that a lot of people are underinformed about these issues, and also underinformed about what it means, or more specifically, underinformed about what it means for their children if they are starting them out or raising them in much more unstable homes, which inevitably a single-parent home is. By the way, I say that because if you have a child when you are in your early or mid-20s with somebody and that relationship breaks up, almost inevitably you're going to have other relationships, and who wouldn't at that age? And there are frequently new step-parents or boyfriends or girlfriends coming into the picture, and then new step-siblings and half-siblings and so on and so forth. All of those transitions seem to be extremely difficult for kids. Why don't people know that? Why aren't we making why isn't it clear at this point to the most of the public that kind of instability will create all sorts of emotional and academic problems for your kids? I should clarify, not every kid. There's a lot of luck and temperamental differences that make a difference, but in general, your kid is at much higher risk. Why don't people know that? And I think one of the reasons is what you hinted at earlier, that the elites, higher educated people, are very, very reluctant to talk about this, even though they know.
Yeah. It is kind of funny. Your work, I've read lots of your articles, preparation of that, and you talk that, the people that want, it's kind of a rat race. In your article, there are two articles that you talk about the academic scandal with Lori Loughlin and co. Talks about that there is just a crazy amount of pressure of being a parent these days, and I was only sort of aware of this, but I'm more aware of it now. My brother, he just had a kid. She's about a year and a half now, and like all the things they do, like when they're in the womb, we have to play certain music, and she has to have the right educational shows, and how are we going to make sure that she learns properly and not just for the public school system and all that. It's just like she's only one and a half, guys.
Yeah.
Cool it.
Yeah. So this is this has made a lot of parents kind of miserable, and you can understand why, because all the joy that you would take from just watching a child develop kind of on their own and organically is taken away from you because you're only worried. You're worried right times. I have a new grandson. My daughter's watching. Has he rolled over yet? He better get to that soon. And then next we'll be watching, is he sitting up yet? In other words, it's not just the fun of watching that happen, but rather it's filled with anxiety. Why? Because you want your kid to be a fast learner, really smart, because that's where the most success will be. The parents who were involved in this scandal, it's not that they cared that much whether their kids were that smart and capable of getting into these schools. They just wanted to make sure their children had the right credentials at the schools, at the more elite schools, and also that they were hanging out with similar people, that is, with people who were smart. And that meant as much to them as the money that they were fully capable of providing their kids. Those kids were going to have trust to get this extra boost. One of them even already had a career in social media. And so I think that the allure of the credential, of the sign that you are smart, you hung out with smart people, capable people, is much too powerful in this country. There are smart and capable who are not at these schools, and this worship of the degree, of the fancy degree, has got to stop. It's driving everybody a little crazy.
It is, and it's one of your points that I had not thought about is that we kind of have right now, we kind of have a glut of really well-qualified individuals to go to an elite university. My sister is one of these people where they're basically straight-A student, loads of curriculars, involved in charity, whatever, the whole list.
Yeah.
And the problem is there's just so many of them. I kind of, it is kind of a funny scandal to make fun of, particularly Aunt Becky from Full House.
It really is.
But it is understandable why they did it. I mean, I kind of sympathize with them, too. It's like, look, there are all these people that are giving these huge, big sums of money to these colleges. I think Harvard's sitting on, I want to say it's like $38 billion or $50 billion endowment. It's just it seems like the system is rigged. I think that's why people are so angry. I really do. It's surprising how much traction this news story still has.
Well, the funny, I would disagree with one point you're making. I know the system seems rigged, and certainly if you have enough money for Daddy to buy a $5 million, you do have. It is rigged, but those are very few and far between. So that is not what's creating the extra competition. So I think those particular examples don't tell us much about the book. Also, all of these schools are reaching out. They are doing some reaching out to lower income kids or kids who would be the first generation to go to college, and any school that wants to be seen as responsible is doing that at this point. But that means raising tuitions. Who may be struggling to up.
No, that's more than fair. Yeah, it is a tough situation. I mean, there's a lot of factors to it about where colleges have decided to spend their money. About
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big subject to talk about on its own. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We were able to get through the interview, even with all the gremlins. I really appreciate it, Kay. I recommend everyone to please continue to read her work. She is affiliated with the Manhatten Institute, which Manhatten Institute has so many really smart people. It is a great place to learn from a lot of intellectuals and writers, and I'm glad you're with them.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your having me.
Thank you. All right. You take care. Enjoy
Okay.
the Easter/Passover weekend.
Okie doke. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. All right, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you all for watching. I'm going to edit the video, clean up what I can, cut out the weird breaks. I appreciate you guys staying with me. I know this was kind of crazy. My apologies. Kay was great. Not her fault at all. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to all of you guys. You know, there was some stuff I got wrong. You know, I don't always have all my research. It's a lot to learn. I only went to a state university, so... Just kidding. Just kidding. You guys have been great. This has been the Happy Warrior Podcast YouTube channel. You guys have a great day.